The information that we are sharing with all of you can make a huge difference in how you experience your reality. By applying the information we have shared, you can create your lives to be lives of joy, love, creativity in a much more positive way, full of synchronicity. You can allow yourselves to be more of yourselves, your true selves, aligning with your true vibration and in communication with your higher minds much more clearly. For us, it expands our family, for we get to experience through you more ways that existence has of expressing itself, and thus it expands our understanding of all that creation and existence can be. The idea then is that we get to form new realities together, to explore new ideas together that we may not have or you may not have considered before. So there is an expansion of ability, of awareness, of family, experience, and thus it benefits us both in our direction and in your direction as well, should you choose to apply, should you choose to be open to contact. But that's up to you.
Thank you. One individual says, I really want to be in contact with an ET, and at the same time, I feel that unconsciously I have a lot of opposition to it. I have a great fear of being in contact with the wrong energies. How can I let go of this fear, and how can I embrace contact?
Perhaps it will help you to understand, as we have explained, that this is physics, like vibration to like vibration. Therefore, what you put out is what you get back. If you are afraid of having negative experiences, that is what will probably ensure that you have a negative experience. If you let go of that fear, you will be changing your vibration to a state where it won't be physically possible to have an experience other than that which is reflective of the positive state you have chosen to be in. You cannot have an opposite experience to the vibrational state you choose to be in. You can only have an experience that is the equivalent of that state. So by being excited, being in a positive state, should you suddenly have a negative experience, it won't be because you're in the positive state. It will be because you have left the positive state and changed your vibrational energy to that of fear, thus attracting what it is you do fear. So allow yourself to understand that you're completely in control of that mechanism, and that the fear itself is what increases the probability of having negative experiences. Of course, they won't be with us or beings like us who only operate in positive ways. You'll simply be attracting other things, most likely not even extraterrestrials, that simply operate on a lower frequency. So the idea is to understand that we are giving you an opportunity to experience our vibration in these exchanges. And if you allow yourself to truly experience our vibration and choose to match it, it's not possible for you to have a negative experience.
Okay, thank you. One of my highest excitements and passions is building a landing pad for a scout craft. What diameter does it need to be, and can you provide us with any information on how a landing pad should be constructed? And can small groups then go to that location and potentially experience contact?
Potentially, yes. Of course, it will depend upon the individual vibrations within the group and the collective vibration of the group, and of course, when it would be the appropriate timing for all concerned, not only with the group, but for those who might even be aware of the fact that the group might be having open contact. So there are a lot of factors that will determine the probability of the actual contact experience. Nevertheless, landing pads would be best if they are circular, 100 feet in diameter, raised a little bit above the ground if possible, but it doesn't have to be, though it should be something solid. So it can be the idea of what you would call concrete. It can be the idea of what you would call rammed earth. And if you wish to have the platform raised at all, perhaps the idea of about 1 foot to 2 feet at most in thickness, and in a flat open area where there are very few trees around or anything else that would interfere with the landing of the craft, especially anything electronic, electrical, or anything like that, or that the craft itself might interfere with, should it be in close proximation to the idea of some of your electrical technology. So best if left natural in a way. It can be stone, it can be concrete, it can be earth, but must be as flat as you can make it, as solid as you can make it.
Thank you.
Yes.
In the first Contact documentary, representations of the Sasani people depict your eyes as being larger than ours, with enlarged dark pupils and having a similar white area around the iris as humans do.
Yes.
Some artists have depicted the area surrounding your iris as black, not white, and some depict your eyes as solid black with no visible iris. Are there actual variations in your eyes like these in your people, and do your people have different colored irises?
What is being depicted in many cases when you have a hybrid with all black and no whites around the iris is a very early version that is closer to the idea of the grays. My people at this point do not have black around the iris. We have white around the iris like you do. The color of our irises can range somewhat. Some of them can be dark, which makes the idea of the entire eye, iris, and pupil look large. But the idea is that most of us have either gray, bluish, sometimes slightly different colors may be in there, very faint and very pale, but most of us you would see having relatively gray or bluish irises around a very large pupil. But the depictions of hybrids such as myself with all black around and no whites around the iris, at this point, that is not an accurate depiction.
And they say, you know, the eyes are the window to the soul.
Yeah.
And we've noticed that in the evolution of your eyes, how is that related to the evolution of your consciousness?
Big eyes, more of the soul showing through, if you want to remain poetic. You can use that analogy as a direct correlation to a representation symbolically of the expanded consciousness that we present to you. Now, of course, the idea of our eyes in general being larger is also a holdover from the evolution of the grays transmuting themselves and being in very dark environments where the eyes needed to grow so they could see in dim light, being that they had destroyed their world and a lot of sunlight didn't get through for generations upon generations. So in their mutation from human to gray, over time, their eyes enlarged while they went underground because a lot of their power could not be directed necessarily toward lighting. They had to use it in other ways for survival. And therefore their environment for a long time was relatively dim. And as they mutated themselves, they gave themselves the capacity to absorb less light and see better in the dark. Hence, they grew the eyes a little bit larger to capture more light. And therefore, because we are genetically connected to them, some of the idea of the larger eyes are a holdover, but they're also, as I said, energetically symbolic and representative and reflective of the idea, as you say, eyes being the windows of the soul, that we also exhibit a larger consciousness, more of our soul self, and also have the ability with our eyes to see more clearly beyond the physical into other dimensions.
And do you still have eye movement?
Of course we have eye movement.
Of course. And then since you're telepathic, what is the function of your ears?
Why do you not have ears if you're telepathic? Are there not other sounds in reality? Are there not the sounds of animals and the sounds of the ocean and the sounds of rain and thunder and so on and so forth? Even though our ears may be smaller now than yours in general, there are still many things to hear. And remember, again, of course, we're not necessarily telepathic with every single species we encounter. Therefore, sometimes we need to hear what they are saying in order to understand them in the same way that you speak to each other. So it's not like being telepathic with ourselves in our own society negates the idea that there are still many things we may need to actually physically hear. in reality.
Okay, thank you. Will you update us on the precursors on Earth, and particularly how many there are at any given time, the percentage ratio of them being recognized by humans, and how this may correlate to contact?
At any given time, there may be, depending upon the phase that is going on of the hybridization agenda and the acclimatization portion of the agenda, anywhere from, say, 25 to 300 precursors on your planet in different places. Some of them briefly, some of them a little longer. The percentage of humans that at this point may recognize them is only about 3 to 5%. The idea, again, is that, of course, the more often they present themselves and walk past you or are somewhere nearby, the more that humans recognize that there is something different about them, and that percentage increases. It increases the probability of contact because you start recognizing and becoming familiar with the vibration that they are giving off of extraterrestrial energy.